So I'm going to do a review on Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth. This is the version I have. It's the mass market paperback with the author on the back here. And yeah, as you can tell, it's a very thick book. I got some notes because I haven't done a review for a really long time. So, this is a historical fiction book. My copy has 983 pages. It spans 51 years, so the timeline that I could see starts in year 1123 and it ends in 1174. So, long time. So, this is an interesting one for me because it's one of those books that's kind of been haunting me a little bit. In that, so I'm 34 years old now. When I was in my early 20s at university, most say probably like 23 years old, something like that, I got told about this book, so I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. And I hated it. I read probably 100 pages of it, and I just could not get into it. I thought, what's the big hype about this book? I just didn't see it. But then since then, other book reviewers that have similar taste to mine have reviewed it and said, yeah, it's really good, it's really good. So I thought, well, maybe I'll give it another try. So at used book fairs and things like that, I've seen it, picked it up, and then I never read it, so I donated it. And I had this back and forth thing going on. At present, I actually have 2 copies of this book. I thought I only had 1. So here I am, 10 years later, and I thought, well, let's give it another shot. If I really don't like it, I'll know for sure. I read the prologue, and I was like, man, this is really good. And I don't understand why I didn't like it. My only memories of it was that I thought it was pretty slow, but I think back then my mind was more immature, and I didn't have the ability to read between the lines as well as I do now. So for that reason as well, I think this book is probably better suited to, I don't really want to say more mature readers, but people that have the patience to read something and not get all the information. Like, this book is huge and it doesn't tell you every nitty-gritty detail. You have to figure it out for yourself a little bit. So I can totally see that as being something that's frustrating. So okay, that's nice, but what's the book actually about? On the surface, it's about this cathedral that gets built in a little village called Kingsbridge. Yeah, I guess you could say that's the plot, right? We spent 50 years waiting for this damn thing to get built. But really, it's a book about the characters. So, before I get into the characters, I'm going to talk about the overall plot, pacing, and what stood out to me. So like I said, the background plot, I guess, is the building of a cathedral. What I really feel like this book is about is the character interactions. So you think about, small town vibes, right? Everyone knows everybody. You do something shitty, you get a shitty reputation. Okay? Everyone knows, like, oh yeah, that guy's, a cheat or whatever. It's like that in this book, but to a much bigger extreme. Your good deeds get remembered, your bad deeds, everybody knows. So your reputation is on the line all the time. Your family pride, the family name, all that stuff really, really matters. Every action has a reaction, and it either happens immediately or 20 years from now. And this book really does a good job in tying all that together and making things relevant that you think, maybe it doesn't really matter. What stood out to me was this takes place during the medieval period, and it was very, very brutal. The prologue really sets the tone for this. Just how people think. There's a lot of poverty, death, there's some rapes, lots of murders, and just, like, oh, you pissed me off? Okay, well, I'll stab you. What you gonna do about it kind of thing. But on the flip side, there's also this intense religious aspect, the fear of God. People are afraid of going to hell. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. I liked how this book gave like an insider's look on medieval life, but also the life in a monastery. We have the perspective of a monk named Philip. And just, his day to day and what sort of things are priorities in his mind besides just, praying all day. Like I said, this is mostly a book about the characters, not so much about the building of the cathedral. It just happens to be that convenient thing that's going on that everyone's aware of and somehow affects or is affected by. So, the characters. In the prologue, there's a couple of unnamed people. Something happens, and then we don't hear about them or what the significance of that was until a bit later in the book. So it starts off with Tom the Builder. He's a mason. He's building a house. William Hamley is part of the family that hired him to build this house. And he rides in and says, "Hey, we don't need you anymore. See ya." So those are the first two characters. And then later on, there's a monk named Philip. So all this is happening around Kingsbridge, kind of in the same area. So, people eventually interact and, deals get made and whatnot. So I'm going to start off with talking about Philip, the monk. Obviously, he's a God's man, right? He's very moral, but his flaw is that he's a little bit greedy, a little bit ambitious. So he tries to justify his greed by saying, it's for the good of the monastery or the good of the church or whatever, right? So he's not as virtuous as it may seem. But I really liked his perspective of things. I would think, all right, Philip, how are you going to get out of this one, right? What you going to do? And so his cleverness and creativity really stood out to me. Tom Builder, as a main character, I expected more out of him. Imagine a tall, stern, kind of serious, I'm proud of my job kind of guy, I'm a mason. That wall needs to be that way because I'm a mason. Well, does the group agree? Okay. It's he didn't really have much to him. He was just kind of they need somebody to build stuff, so let's get this guy in. And the book mentioned a few times like other characters could see that Tom was a little bit more intelligent than he let on, but even still, he was just kind of bleh. Then we have William Hamley and the whole Hamley family. William himself is probably one of the main villains in the family. There's a few, but he's one that stands out to me, and he's someone that's very impulsive, quick to anger, youthful. Well, he starts off youthful, or it spans 50 years. And he's just someone that he carries a grudge. If you do him wrong, he won't forget, and he'll make it his life mission to get back at you, even if it doesn't really matter, So he interjects the story quite a bit. And I want to talk about one of the women in the story, Alina. I think that's how you say her name. It's Aliena. So it might be Eliana, I don't know. She is the daughter of an earl, quite rich, and she goes through a lot of situations that really show her character. She's fiercely independent, very confident. She's someone that never gives up, yet she kind of has this curse where she knows what it is she wants. She just can't get it because of oaths or assholes or whatever. There's someone's bothering her, and there you go. So I think this book was definitely worth the read. The characters are what makes it a good story. So if you're someone that needs a lot of action and be spoon-fed, this is what happened, and oh, scary, look what happened next, intense, you might not like this book. It's definitely a slower pace. It's more about, like I said, what's not being said, what are people's ulterior motives, how do the actions of one person affect the other, but in a very intricate way. So I really appreciate that. I liked that. At the same time, I really liked reading a book that took place in medieval England. building cathedrals, right? I don't know. I live in Canada on the West Coast, but my heritage is German and Scottish, so it's kind of cool to read about like that part of the world a little bit, because that's interesting to me. So I do really like how it all tied together. One thing that took me off guard, or by surprise I guess, is that you have like these characters I mentioned, which are very early on. You kind of get a feel for who like the main characters are, the ones that have the most happen to them, or the story seems to follow the most. And I'm like, okay. But then there's a shift later in the book, and it kind of goes off on a tangent for a bit. And I wasn't sure where that was going to go, but it worked, and it definitely added another depth to the story, but at the same time it felt a little bit out of place. Like, I expected the whole story to be in its own little bubble, and I didn't expect one character to, shoot off in this direction and the whole story just shifts there as well. It was a little bit weird. But all in all, I thought it was a really good book. I'm glad I gave it a second chance, like 10 years later. I think this is a part of a series, but the way it ended is that I don't really know what book 2 would be about, to be quite honest, unless it's like, the next generation or something like that. The conclusions at the end of the book wrapped up pretty nicely, pretty quickly, I'd say, actually. You have this chunk of a book, and it's only the last 200 pages that things get wrapped up. Justice is made to the bad people, good things happen to the good people. Not always, but a satisfiable amount happens. So I felt like it wrapped up pretty cleanly, so I'm not really sure what the next one would be about. But if it is set kind of around the same time span and does the same job of being more of like a character study rather than a plot-driven book, then I would be interested in checking it out. I probably should have looked at that before making this video, but that is my opinion on that. So, my timer says I'm over 12 minutes now. It's been a while since I made a review video. Hopefully this wasn't too long, but if you've read this book, please let me know in the comments what you thought of it. Please don't post any spoilers in case other people read your comment and they'd like to read the book themselves. That's probably why they're gonna look at this video in the first place. So there it is. And I just noticed something really weird. There's a blurb on the front by Cosmopolitan. Like, isn't that like a stupid girl magazine? It says, enormous and brilliant, a great epic tale. But yeah, I'll stop rambling and let me know in the comments what you thought. If this is a book that interests you, or if you're just like, nope, pass.